I think some people who have moved abroad probably would have a vote if they'd only moved abroad about 6 months before the election. But again, in any other election that we have just now, people that live abroad don't get to vote. So you wouldn't get to vote in a Scottish Parliament election if you lived abroad. And I think what's important about any election and the referendum is that it be a decision made by the people that actually live and work in Scotland. And the interesting thing here is, and I was actually brought up in Australia because we emigrated there when I was a wee girl. And although I wrote to the SNP, actually, when I was your age, and I was always very passionate about the future of Scotland, my first votes were in Australia, and it never occurred to me when I was living in Australia that I would have the right to vote in Scotland just because I had been born there. I knew that if I wanted to vote in Scotland, I had to come back to Scotland, and I think that's right.
That's a really good question, which I haven't thought an awful lot about, to be truthful, because obviously when there's general elections, there are people overseas who are allowed to vote, you know, soldiers and things like that, and people who are still resident, considered as resident, they get votes, etc. So it goes back to the same question about the age. Yeah. So the same set of rules should apply to who's entitled to vote in an election in Scotland when you're considering this. That then suggests that some people in England might be allowed to vote, right? Some people in Canada and Australia and Africa might be allowed to vote. But I think the question is that, or the answer is that if they're allowed to vote in a general election, you'd have to have a strong argument as to why they couldn't be allowed to vote in this election.